Thanks for joining us here at Anathan. Just before we get started on today's message, I want to make sure you know how to get even more content and encouragement from the Anathan team. Anathan content is created to facilitate you becoming one of the most influential spiritual leaders in the world. So whether it's teaching and worship resources, leadership resources, or how to plug into a microchurch, or even connect through Anathan Biz Solutions, Anathan's YouChurch app has all of this great content and more. So download your free YouChurch app on either the Apple App Store, Google Play, Apple TV, or Roku. Also, towards the end of this video, you'll be encouraged to give towards the global move of Anathan. Would you please pray and consider this? Because it's through the generous donations from people such as yourself who help keep all of this amazing content free for others. So get ready now to engage in this week's message as God takes you further and deeper into encounters with His always perfect love for greater impact, because He wants to love the world through you.
Hi, and welcome back to this final session in the series Why Worship. In our first 3 sessions together, we have done a deep dive on the what, who, and how of worship. We learned that worship requires that the attention of our hearts be directed in reverence, honor, adoration, and regard toward God. We talked about the idea that humans are made to worship something, and that the attention of our hearts can be, and often will be, drawn by things other than God. In our last session together, we explored a new reality that challenged us to make worship something that permeates our everyday lives and activities. I trust that your microchurch discussion times provided you with some creative ways to worship together now that you've got together again. This session, I want to address what worship is not. Why do I consider this important? Well, even though we've discovered some potentially new and exciting things about worship, for many of us, and I would venture to say anyone who has been attending church for any length of time, there are still some ideas, ideals, and paradigms that we need to strip away in order to fully engage in the kind of lifestyle worship that God calls us to. So we're going to take a look at the back end of the last 3 sessions to see how our thinking needs to shift. Mark and I, in a former life, spent much of our ministry time as worship leaders. As this was our vocation, we devoted a lot of time and energy to the art and science of worship. We formed ideas and opinions about what worship should include and what it shouldn't include. Many of these ideas and opinions were shaped by the people that we ministered to, the congregants of the churches we were ministering in. One of the more frustrating things about being a worship pastor is that it is quite impossible to please all of the people all of the time. For example, in one church we were working, we were encouraged to make the music more contemporary in order to reach a younger demographic in our area. In an effort to fulfill that mandate, we made a decision to move the organ off the stage in the sanctuary to make room for other instruments. While the young people in the congregation were excited by the change, there were many in the older demographic that were not so thrilled. This was made known to us by the compilation of a letter, a ransom letter, if you can imagine, where the author of said letter took it upon himself to cut out words and letters from magazines and newspapers to form every line expressing his dissatisfaction, displeasure, and indeed disgust at the cavalier way in which we were treating the sacredness of worship. How did we know it was a gentleman that composed this letter? He did actually sign his name at the bottom, no word of a lie. People do and say some pretty extreme things when the things they hold to be sacred are violated. For this man, the organ formed the centerpiece of worship, and our moving it from its position of prominence on the stage was no different than if we had marched into the temple in Jerusalem and removed the altar from its place. For him, we had removed something sacred and stripped away an important part of his worship experience. Why do I tell you that story? Amusing as some of us might find it, we all have those things that we hold sacred in our ideas and ideals of worship. Things that we cannot fathom doing without. Things that we find difficult to let go of. Some of these things in their place are right and good, but some, not so much. If you were to attend a worship service at a church in New Guinea, or one in Ghana, or one in Nepal, or one in Italy, forget denominations for a moment, every one of those services would be very different. As a Westerner walking into a church anywhere else in the world, we would find much of what they did and how they conducted their service not just to be different, but also possibly to be offensive, depending on what we were accustomed to. For example, many lifetimes ago, when Mark did a short-term missions trip into Papua New Guinea in 1991, he enjoyed the privilege of sharing communion with the believers in the tribe he was visiting. In the absence of bread and wine, banana and coconut milk were used as the elements. He describes the experience as being very impactful and very moving. Fast forward 10 years or so, and we were ministering at a small church in Melbourne, Australia. One of the young leaders in the church was asked to lead communion one Sunday, and his creative mind wanted to do something different, to challenge the apathetic and sometimes indifferent mindset that many, including himself as he confessed in his address, would bring to the communion table. So he chose to use grapes and water as the elements in this communion in an attempt to have people think about what they were doing. Far from being moving and impactful, many of the congregants were highly offended at his disregard for the sacred elements of the Lord's Supper. Now, had he approached the sacrament in an offhanded, couldn't care less kind of way, I might have agreed with them. But the removal of something sacred to them violated their core value of what communion should be. And in their response, they wounded the heart of a young man whose intentions were anything but offhanded or careless. You see, sincerity of heart will differ between any two believers. What we hold sacred must also be held before the Lord for His judgment. Not always held loosely, don't mishear me on this, but we know full well that man looks on the surface and God looks on the heart. Bananas and coconut milk would be out of place in the Vatican, just as wafers and alcoholic wine would be out of place in a Baptist church. Whether we use grape juice and bread as the elements, crackers and cranberry juice, or something else entirely, whether we drink from the same cup, dunk the wafer in the wine, hand out small individual cups, it doesn't really matter so much. Truth be told, if we were to be doing communion exactly as Jesus instigated it in the Last Supper as he shared it with his disciples, we would all be sitting down to a Passover Seder, tearing chunks off the same big flat loaf of unleavened bread with our own chalice of wine served in between courses of lamb and honeyed dates or some such. The point is that the how is not as important as the doing of it. And if the who is God, and the reverence, adoration, honour and regard of our heart is given only to Him, then the how doesn't matter so much. There's a story that you've probably heard and we've heard and have retold many times. Whether it's true or not, the sentiment of it is profound. The story goes something like this. As the pastor of a local church was shaking hands at the back of the church after service one Sunday morning, he was confronted by a lady with a bit of an axe to grind. As she shook his hand and after thanking him for his sermon that morning, she added, "But I must say, Pastor, I was very disappointed with the worship this morning. I really got nothing out of it at all." The pastor, being a quick-thinking man, immediately apologized to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm so incredibly sorry. I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Oh?" The woman was a bit confused. What sort of misunderstanding, she says. The pastor replied, I really should have been more clear in my introduction. We didn't come here this morning to worship you. It gets a bit of a giggle, but this story is a sharp reminder that worship is not for us. We do not attend worship to be filled up or encouraged or in any other way to add to ourselves. Worship is about Him. Worship is about what we bring, and in some cases it's about what we leave behind. Worship, giving the reverent attention of our heart entirely to God, blesses Him, it pleases Him, it builds intimacy with Him, and as a result it draws us closer to Him. If we, who are to bring the attention of our heart to Him, only seek to take something away from this time with Him, then we haven't worshipped Him at all. I'm going to leave you to think on that for a moment, and I'll be back in a few moments with your activation questions. Thank you so much for checking out our giving page.
One of the very great honours we have as God's people is to give. Our God is a generous God, and if we are to bear His image upon the earth, it makes sense that we would be a generous people. God's people should be known for their generosity in giving.
Yes, indeed. And at Anathan, our giving goes towards building people and not buildings. Every expense we incur goes towards reaching the people in your world, the ones you love and pray for on a daily basis.
So we have made giving easy. When you click on the giving link below, you'll be taken to our online giving portal. There'll be one for US taxpayers and a separate one for other nations. Then just follow the prompts to make your donation today.
As always, our prayer for you is that you will grow further and deeper in your relationship with our always good God for greater impact on His kingdom.
Remember, He wants to love the world through you.
Welcome back. The richness of corporate worship depends on the depths you are prepared to go personally in worship. Cultivate a lifestyle of worship and nurture the reverent adoration of your heart for Him, and you will find that the need to worship other things will slowly diminish over time. Cultivate a lifestyle of worship, and you will find yourself less offended by what and how and where and when others worship, and be more and more enamored with the person and the presence of God. Worship is not about you, or your ideals, or your preferences. It is only and entirely about to whom the attention of your heart is given. Here are some questions for you to discuss in your microchurches. What are some of the things that you have considered to be the non-negotiables of worship? Of these things, which of them are about you and your preferences, and which really truly are non-negotiable? In your group, read John chapter 4 verses 19 to 24. In this account of the conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, what does Jesus say about how the Father wants us to worship Him? I really love the Passion Translation on this. If you have it, share it with the others in your microchurch for a great perspective on this question. My prayer for you in the coming days is that you will find the desire to practice this lifestyle of worship, allowing Him to take you further and deeper into encounters with His always perfect love for greater impact, because He will then love the world through you.
We pray this message today will take you to greater encounters with God's always perfect love. Also, I want to remind you to take a few moments to download your free YouChurch app on either Apple App Store, Google Play, Apple TV or Roku for much more content and powerful tools to help you become one of the most influential spiritual leaders in the world. Also, if you'd like to donate to Anathan, our giving links are listed below to help us keep this great content free for others. Here are this week's activations.